Ngā nui ki a koutou. Welcome everybody to this prestige lecture. I'm enormously delighted to welcome Peggy Ertmer to our campus. And we had a seminar earlier on today, but this is an extra special session where we welcome other people to the campus as well, including our partner schools. Thank you very much for making the time, particularly during the holidays. That's much appreciated. And just a little bit before, this is also linked with the e-learning lab, and you'll see a range of publications from the college on the side there, and also our brochure about e-learning courses which link with other programs. So those are the master's courses and brochures if you'd like to see them on the side. There's a special course at the moment called Transforming Education in Canterbury, and some of you may well be involved in that course who are here. Would that be right? Julie certainly is, and Annalise is, but maybe some of the students in the course are here as well. Maybe not. But in any case, I'd like to draw it to your attention because it's one in which we are collaborating with core education as well as other people to link in and serve the community in this region. And it's an important piece of responding to the needs in Christchurch and Canterbury at this time.
Shameless plug, there is a current starting on the 2nd of May, if anyone would still like to join that club.
Judy might remind you at the end. Anyway, there it is. But linked in with this, you may have read Peggy Ertmer if you've been studying. It's a funny thought, isn't it, to read somebody before you meet them. And that's because Peggy, coming as she does from Purdue University in the USA, is a well-known leader of both theory and practice in instructional design. And as I've been briefing Peggy, it's not something we do, it's not something we teach, because in the European perspective, we tend not to actually have programs or courses in instructional design, and yet we have instructional designers, and there's some of the ones who work in the university here with us today. And it is linked in with some of our courses. So for example, best practices in learning and teaching online is definitely got instructional design in it, but we don't use the term. Strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Peggy, I knew in a way when I was working in the States, and you were one of those people up there.
Oh,
yeah. Particularly the case-based approach to teaching and problem-based learning. Peggy is really well known for her research, but also the materials she's developed. They're very high quality because she knows what she's talking about in terms of design. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you here to Christchurch and to Canterbury.
Thank you.
And also to know that you're going to be helping us learn more about it today. And we have time for questions. And I think you'd prefer them towards the end, right?
Yes, yeah. Probably.
But if you have a burning question, you could always try and interrupt.
If something really doesn't make sense, then absolutely.
So that's lovely. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I have to start by just thanking you for all being here, for being just so incredibly welcoming. It's really been amazing. And a special thank you to Nikki and to Julie for inviting me to come and talk to you today. Oh my gosh, I have fallen in love with your country. It is amazing. We just returned from a 5-day tour of the South Island and hit all the highlights, and I don't know how you guys get any work done around here because I would be too distracted. It's just really beautiful. It's been wonderful. I'm taking back lots of memories, lots of photos. I couldn't take a bad shot. Every photo, it's like, yep, that's a good one. Yep, that's a good one. And trying to pick which of the few to put on Facebook was quite a challenge, but a good challenge to have. So, as Nikki said, I'm Peg Ertmer. I'm a professor of learning, design, and technology. That's our program area at Purdue University. So I have to ask you, how many of you have heard of Purdue before? Oh, good. How many of you know where Purdue is? A few, okay. We're in West Lafayette, Indiana, so not a big urban area. We're about 2 hours south of Chicago. So kind of in the middle of the country, corn, soybean country, really. Purdue is a land-grant institution, which means it was established to help bring agriculture and engineering technology to the general public. And it actually the university started after President Lincoln they passed an act that allowed these land-grant universities to be established. And of course, John Purdue donated a lot of the land, which enabled the university to bear his name. Maybe more important to the presentation today, it might be important for you to know that I am a former primary classroom teacher and a former special education teacher. And so that probably explains why I've had this long-standing interest in really helping teachers become as effective, as successful as they possibly can. I've worked with a lot of pre-service and in-service teachers who are interested in changing their pedagogy and adopting new tools or new strategies. And most notably, I guess, some of the strategies or tools, I've worked with teachers who are adopting one-to-one technology. That was actually many years ago. Web 2.0 tools a little more recently, and as Nikki alluded to, both case-based and problem-based learning in terms of the kinds of pedagogies teachers are interested in adopting. So in today's talk, I'm going to share kind of a few of the things I've learned along the way over the course of many different projects, and I'm going to be sharing snippets from a few different projects as kind of evidence that some of the things I'm suggesting or recommending actually kind of bear out in the literature, if you will. So I've been reading a bit about the current effort in New Zealand to transform these traditional teaching spaces into innovative learning environments. The Ministry of Education says that this is important because space can have an impact on learning. And it seems to me at least that the main purpose behind this is they want to create learning spaces that integrate both open, resource-rich physical spaces with teaching practices that facilitate kind of an active student engagement, collaborative, inquiry-oriented, or what I would call problem-centered learning. So in the spirit of full disclosure, I will readily admit I am not an expert on the impact of physical spaces on learning. It seems fairly clear that a minimum level of quality, at least in terms of safety or noise levels, is needed. But beyond that, I'm not sure how much a physical space in and of itself is going to impact learning. I really like this quote from the Ministry of Education, which says that good spaces enable, but they don't guarantee good educational outcomes. If we think about virtual learning spaces, where I spend a lot of my time and teaching courses online, the physical space isn't really that important, or at least the concerns about physical spaces kind of gets translated into concerns about broadband or connectivity, etc. So we're not free from contextual influences, but a physical classroom isn't really something we need to worry about. What seems really most critical to me is that we think about how the teaching and learning is occurring within these spaces. And luckily, that's where I have a little bit more experience. So I found a great sabbatical report, actually, from Mark Wilson, who is a principal here at a high school in Christchurch. I'm afraid to pronounce it because I'm sure I'll pronounce it wrong. It looks to me like Kashmir. Kashmir. Okay. I loved what he said, that we can't just talk about these innovative learning spaces. It's got to be complemented by an innovative learning mindset if we're really going to be successful. And he defines that as kind of an approach that has an emphasis on active student involvement, a focus on collaboration, and an emphasis on inquiry learning. So Folan and Langworthy refer to this kind of mindset, if you will, as deep learning. And I love this part where they say it's going to result in irresistibly engaging learning. I mean, isn't that what we want for our students? If you've read any of Mark Prensky's work, he kind of takes all of these, what I would call student-centered approaches, inquiry-based, project-based, problem-based, case-based, and kind of lumps them all under the umbrella term of partnering pedagogies. And I really like that because I think it captures what we're really trying to accomplish in these kinds of environments. So across these different methods, if you will, the things that are consistent is that there's an emphasis on anchoring learning in authentic real-world problems, that students are expected to collaborate with each other, with the teacher, with community stakeholders to resolve these real-world problems, and that you're always using the tools of the discipline, which in today's world are typically digital tools, right? However, Folan and Langworthy have a caution in their book that says achieving real gains in deep learning is not easy. I couldn't agree more. We definitely have to build teachers' capacity for this kind of teaching and learning. And to me, that means you have to build capacity in all of these different aspects of deep learning. So you have to find, teachers have to learn how to connect to students' interests and students' passions. You need to know how to facilitate new roles for teachers and students. You have to be able to support students' efforts throughout the learning process by making your own thinking visible, modeling for them, monitoring where they're having difficulty, and then adding in scaffolds as they're needed to support students throughout the process. So you're continuously diagnosing where the students are and choosing strategies that move them forward. So we know that this kind of change is really hard and it's very slow. It doesn't happen overnight. It rarely works to ask teachers to change everything all at once. When I teach courses about problem-based learning, that's the biggest fear that teachers have. Oh my gosh, you want me to change my whole curriculum? No, 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 no. Let's start small. You're never going to change everything overnight. And teachers, if they see, I mean, these are teachers that want to adopt problem-based learning, and yet they're so overwhelmed by the magnitude of change that they think is required that if they don't see a way to get started, or if they don't see that they have a remote chance of being successful, they're going to shut down. And I can't say as I blame them. It's just too much. So what I've learned through the years is it's much better to, and much more effective actually, to ask teachers to change, kind of take baby steps towards that change. In other words, I think I shouldn't call my course How to Use Problem-Based Learning, because I think that frightens teachers. I think I should call it something about learning how to ask good questions or learning how to facilitate good discussions, because those are the strategies, or as I call here, the teaching moves that are going to enable teachers to actually be effective with those kinds of approaches. So again, it's been a long road, but I've finally figured out that if we focus our professional development at the strategy level as opposed to this belief or philosophical level, we're going to be much more successful, and teachers are not going to be as frightened or as concerned about making the kinds of changes that the strategy level requires. Okay, so today I'm going to kind of talk about two specific baby steps, if you will, that I think we can help teachers take that will move them more towards the adoption of these innovative learning pedagogies: questioning and facilitation. These are things that are important to innovative teaching, especially the kind of teaching that we're asking for these innovative learning spaces. So let me talk a little bit about those two strategies. So let's start with questioning. In a partnering pedagogy, one of the teacher's primary responsibilities is to ask good questions. So the questions that we ask not only is going to prompt students to think at deeper levels, but it's also going to model for students kind of the kinds of questions they should ask. They're developing their questioning skills, so we're going to provide a model if we ask good questions of our own. And the literature shows that when teachers ask higher level questions, students tend to respond with higher level answers and higher level questions themselves. So again, let's see if we can get this in place first as a first step towards an innovative learning approach. So as a simple way to think about levels of questions, I tend to refer to blooms. So at the lower levels, knowledge, comprehension, application. At the higher levels, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And I hope you can read this. I know it's kind of small, but these are the kinds of verbs that you can keep in mind when you're trying to think about, what do I want my students to do? Is the activity I'm asking them to do, or the question I'm asking them to answer, at a knowledge level? Am I asking them to define something or to label something? Or is it at perhaps an application level where I'm asking them to demonstrate something, or to interpret, to translate? Or as you move up at the evaluation level, where you're asking them to critique something or to judge the value or worth of something. So this little chart gives you a really good place to start in terms of thinking about the kinds of questions or the kinds of activities we engage students in. So I want to give you an example of why I think this is a really good baby step, if you will. Something that I saw very early on. Well, in 2003, I was working with a school district that had just gotten this large grant that the purpose was to increase teachers' digital literacy. Well, their focus on digital literacy so that the students in their classrooms increase their skills. The district was smart. They started by focusing on the teachers and the strategies that they were using in trying to figure out ways to bring digital literacy down to the students. So what they did is they hired 35 teachers from their own district to serve as digital literacy coaches in the buildings. So they gave them a lot of professional development, and which they were then expected to take back to their own buildings. So I saw this small success story very early on. One coach from the middle school worked with 2 science teachers and a math teacher to increase the level of questions that they were asking in their classrooms. So the coach began by gathering some pre-intervention data, if you will. So in February, went into the classrooms and counted the number of questions the teachers asked, and then categorized them at the level of blooms that they were asking them. Gave a little bit of instruction to the to the teachers. Talked about blooms, talked about how they might increase their levels of questions to include higher level questions, and then help them put reminders up around the room. So, verbs that would remind them, critique, compare and contrast, as opposed to label or define, etc. So pretty simple intervention. Gathered data in May after the teachers had made the attempt to change their practice. Okay, so again, kind of simple, but had almost an immediate impact. In February, the teachers' questions were primarily at the lower 2 levels. You can see 65 and 18% at the lower 2 levels. And the students' questions were pretty similar at the same levels. The students are down here. And what this chart doesn't show is that in February, the teachers asked 5 times as many questions as the students. So a lot of ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, etc. In May, some improvement. You see fewer questions at the lower levels, and then an increase at the higher levels. And the same with the students. Some decrease, great decrease actually, in the knowledge questions that they were asking, and much more on the analysis, synthesis, and evaluation questions. So, and at that point, the teachers were asking much fewer questions overall, which suggests there was a lot more elaboration or discussion going on after each question. So this study just made this huge impression on me. It's like, oh my gosh, they didn't do anything really big or real fancy, and then here you've got some immediate changes. And the teachers could feel confident and successful at what they had done. Again, baby steps, kind of increasing their confidence, increasing their capacity with a pretty simple intervention. So, and what I thought was really interesting, maybe it's not surprising, but the students took their cues from the teacher. I mean, I guess you'd expect that. So as the teacher's questions changed, the students' questions changed. And so they're watching the teacher modeling this learning process, and they're learning from that. And the simple reminders around the room were a cue for everybody to kind of focus on the goal. You know, they all knew that they were trying to focus their discussions at a higher level. So it didn't take too much effort for the teachers to decrease the number of questions at the lower levels, or the total number of questions. So we moved away from this. Are you familiar with this IRE pattern, which is pretty typical in classrooms in the United States anyway? Typical pattern where the teacher initiates a question, the student responds, and then the teacher evaluates. Yes, that's right. No, that isn't, etc. So by opening up the questions, making them more open-ended, making it so there was more than one answer, kind of move the questioning pattern away from that to one that was much more, involved much more thinking and engaged the students in much higher levels of thinking. And maybe it made the students a little less afraid to offer an answer because there wasn't as much evaluation going on, right? If it's an opinion type of question, students can't be wrong in the opinion that they express. So it gives them a little more security or safety in terms of answering the questions that the teachers are throwing out. So again, a small study, but it really got me thinking, you know, would we see something similar in an online environment? Like with a larger sample, more advanced learners. I knew that there was research that showed that, this is really kind of sad, that among the students posed in online discussions, the dominant pattern is low-level discussion posts, between 75 and 80%. I mean, that's huge. So there's a strong relationship between the kinds of questions asked, and now we're not looking at the kinds of questions students ask, but the kinds of responses they make. We kind of wondered, why are so many discussion posts at such a low level? You know, what's going on? Is it kind of the lack of sophistication among students thinking? Is it that the task is too simple? Or is it maybe, as McLaughlin and Minard suggested, that it had perhaps to do with the wording of the prompt? So the first question that the teacher asks everybody to respond to, okay? And so we thought, okay, well, let's find out. So we got a much bigger sample, much bigger study. We classified 92 online question prompts into the 6 levels of Bloom. So we grouped the 2 lower levels into a low level, the 2 middle into medium, and then the 2 high into the high category. So let me give you an example. So low kind of prompt would be, can you define connectivism? Okay, give a definition of connectivism. So every student would give a definition. Okay, medium might be, how have you seen connectivism applied in a classroom, or how would you apply it? So you're now at an application level. And a high question might be something like, critique this teaching practice in terms of the principles of connectivism. Okay, so just different ways of asking a question. So then we looked at all the students' responses to those 92 question prompts. So 850 student responses, 19 asynchronous discussions, again, 10 different courses, 6 different disciplines. So we really kind of sampled a broad range of courses, some undergraduate, some graduate. And then, okay, so we've coded the question prompts and we've coded students' responses, and we're going to look at, is there a relationship between those? And let me explain a little bit about what you're seeing here. So the horizontal level is the level of the question that the instructor posted. And the vertical axis is the percentage of response at each level of Bloom. So you've got blue is knowledge. Are they coming out right, the colors? Yeah. Comprehension, application, etc. on up. Okay, so for low-level questions, you've got most of them in a comprehension level. And as you move to the higher level questions, these actually go down. The lower level responses start to go down. This goes down, the blue and the maroon, if you will, tend to go down from where they were. Okay? And as you have a general upward trend, if you will, in these higher level responses as the question levels get higher. Okay? So here, we don't even have any evaluation responses, right? But as you go up, you go from, well, basically 1% at the top two levels here to 17% here. So you are seeing more high-level responses to the high-level questions. There's no real trend that we can see in kind of the green, the application. It's kind of fairly equal to the low and the medium level questions. It goes down a little bit to the higher level questions. And definitely synthesis and evaluation generally went up. So you've probably noticed that none of the questions, the low, medium, or high, are generating a majority of the responses at a high level, right? You still have like 33% of the responses at a comprehension level when the question's a higher level. So it's not foolproof, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. I can pause for a minute if anybody has a burning question. Okay, so the results did support basically the proposed relationship that we had suggested, that there's a relationship between the level of question asked and the level of responses received. So as a first step, instructors would do well to think about what they ask students to do or to talk about in a discussion, right? Simple as looking at the verbs that you're using and moving them up the scale a couple notches. However, it's interesting that what we found was very similar to the literature we had seen, that nearly half of the responses to the 19 different question prompts were at low level, 47%, with an equal percentage, 47% also at the medium levels. Is that really where we want our students to be? Only 6% of the student responses were actually at that higher level. So that, in some ways, that's kind of discouraging. But if you look back at this, you can see every single level of question was able to generate some higher level responses as well as lower. So that says to me there's more going on here than just the level of question. I mean, it'd be great if you could just post a high level question and then leave it alone and expect students are going to talk about it at a high level. But yeah, that's not the way it works. And right now researchers are suggesting that we should pay maybe less attention to that initial question and more attention to the interaction that occurs after that question. And that kind of makes sense to me, that you've got to do more than just put out a first question. So maybe we need some additional coaching or some scaffolding, what I'm going to talk about as facilitation, because it's through those strategies that you can actually move students forward. If they answer at a low level, you can prompt and say, well, how does this compare to that? Or how would you evaluate this instance? Or you can prompt them to move forward, which is maybe what was happening in those discussions that we coded. Some of those ones that reached the higher levels maybe had better facilitation. We didn't really look at that in that study. But it suggests to me there's really something else important that we really need to look at. All right, so let's talk about facilitation, if you will. Again, think about what a partnering pedagogy is trying to do. And we know that discussion is kind of a key strategy. You want to engage the students in productive discourse. You want conversation with and among the students. So obviously your role as a facilitator is going to be to promote that, to support that. And I think that means we need to learn, or teachers need to learn how to promote this sense making among their students, how not to cut off a conversation that's just getting going, validating students' ideas, using strategies such as restating or revoicing their ideas, legitimizing disagreements, saying, yeah, there's two sides to this discussion, let's talk about it, and not taking sides, not saying, yeah, I think you've got a good point, and say, no, let's hear this, but not giving it equal time, if you will. Using a lot of probing questions, prompting the students to elaborate, to go deeper. Kind of, when students say something in a discussion, it's the responsibility of the facilitator to go and say, well, I don't understand, elaborate, give me an example, or can you clarify? So always probing students to tell you more, again, prompting them to go deeper. So again, we know that the research has shown that this active facilitator participation makes a difference in face-to-face discussions. It really supports their understanding of content, their ability to apply the skills that they're learning. And we also know that unmoderated discussions, students engage in a real superficial analysis of a situation. It's, they don't go very far. So this research has all been done in the face-to-face environment. So again, kind of wondered, okay, is it going to be true in the online environment as well? What does active facilitation look like in that environment? Okay, so my apologies to those who were at the talk this morning, because I'm going to repeat a little bit of what you heard about some of the evidence that we've found that really shows that facilitation does make a difference in what students learn in an online asynchronous discussion. So I've been working with my colleague, Adri Kaler, to examine differences in what students learn from a case-based discussion. We looked at four different sections discussing the same case study. Two of the sections were facilitated and two were not facilitated. And the way we're looking at learning, and this takes a little bit of explanation here, when students engage in a case study discussion, the goal of the instructor is that they cover a certain amount of content. I suppose that's true in any discussion, right? So we've labeled this the targeted problem space. We know that the students should talk about X, Y, and Z, given this particular set of issues in this case. And so we're using as a measure of learning to what extent did they actually talk about X, Y, and Z. Okay, we've divided this targeted problem space, if you will, into two main components. Problem finding, it's just the first phase of the discussion where they're trying to identify the issues, trying to identify the constraints in the project, and then problem resolution, which is where they're trying to solve the problem, given the constraints. Okay, so it just helped us kind of count all that was going on in the discussion. So again, two facilitated discussions taught by the same instructor, intentionally engaged in the discussion, doing things like I mentioned before, clarifying misconceptions, asking probing questions, prompting them to go deeper. And in the non-facilitated discussions, then the instructors, I hope they were monitoring, but they were not actively participating in the discussion at all. Okay, so they posted the initial predetermined prompt and the mid-week prompt, but that was it. They didn't get in and respond to any of the students' ideas. Okay, and this just happened. This kind of an opportunity just kind of fell into my lap because I was overseeing 6 sections of an online course. So it's the same course that was being taught by some adjuncts that we had to hire to help with the teaching load. And I made the assumption that everybody knew how to facilitate a discussion, so I didn't really worry about it. But then, as a lead for the course, I had to go in and look at the discussions. It's like, oh my gosh, there's no facilitation here. Here's a good opportunity to look at, kind of the impact of that on what students are actually talking about. So that's what we did. And so I'm going to give you a few of the results. Again, this is very condensed, and you're missing a lot of the context around this, but I hope you'll ask questions if it's not clear to you. So first we wanted to make sure that we're actually looking at the same thing in these discussions. I mean, that we're not comparing apples to oranges, that in general the students are talking about the same amount. And this line that's highlighted shows you that in general, in 3 out of the 4 discussions, students are talking about the same amount. This is the average number of posts per student. So 11 to 14 posts per student, with the first non-facilitated discussion kind of being halfway there, not near as active of students. So now this chart actually shows you what they talked about. And down this left side, these are the things we expected them to talk about. The stakeholders in the case, the role of the instructional designer, what the design challenge is, what are the constraints, and what are the relationships among all these challenges. So what's highlighted here are where in these 4 sections the most conversation occurred about these different aspects of the problem finding space. Okay, so you see a lot of them. 3 of them occurred in this first facilitated discussion. You've got 1 here, and then you do have 1 in this non-facilitated discussion, which suggests, okay, maybe students can cover the intended problem space without facilitation. I mean, they at least got a lot of conversation going on here, but the difference between these 2 suggests that maybe this was just depending on the group of students that happened to be in that section. They were very active, very talkative. And it also actually makes me wonder if the students didn't get stuck here, because they didn't talk about the design challenge a whole lot. It's easy to talk about what your constraints are in a project. Oh, there's not enough money, oh, we don't have time, and etc. That's easy, maybe lower level, if you will. Whereas talking about what the design challenge is, or the relationship among challenges, that's a little harder. And I think that 47 is actually not a good sign in this particular situation. It might have been an indicator that they were just having a good time talking about all the things that were wrong in this project. All right, so I'm just going to highlight kind of one of the key differences that I'm sorry, I haven't talked about problem resolution space. So again, in the first 2 facilitated sections, you see a lot of conversation around what are the solutions, how do they address these specific design challenges, how do they address these specific constraints. Lots more conversation happening here than here. This one is the most conversation about consequences, but not really much different from these others. And again here, a very, I'd call subdued conversation, if you will. Just not a lot of conversation happening. Nobody's prompting them to go deeper or to say anything else. Okay, so I think this slide just kind of summarizes some of the things that I thought were most important here. Because this was an instructional design case, the 2 main things students should have been talking about were what are the design challenges and how do those solutions address them. So just looking at that aspect of what they talked about, you can see quite a difference in the facilitated sections. They articulated the design challenges 32 times, and in the non-facilitated, only about half that. And the same is true for the discussion of the solutions that were actually going to address the specific challenges. In the facilitated sections, average of 41 times that it was talked about. In the non-facilitated, only 21 times. So again, you've got a lot more conversation, and it's more focused on the things that are important to think about in this particular context. So again, just bringing this back to, okay, what does this tell us about facilitation, how important it is? So these results suggest that students are going to talk about the content at a deeper level when the discussion's facilitated. They talked about more aspects of it, and they went into more detail. And even with some equal amount of posts or discussion, the quality was quite different. That they were talking about different things for the most part. And then that variation between the 2 non-facilitated discussions suggests that there's probably something going on in terms of the students that are participating, and also suggests it might be a little bit more hit or miss whether they actually cover the content that you wanted to be covered. So again, it kind of cements or reinforces for us that facilitators need to be engaged in the discussions to extend students' thinking, really get them talking to each other, and that requires some kind of intentional, active participation. So that's my next question. So what does active facilitation look like? We didn't talk about that in that study. We just looked at what the students did for the most part. So again, you can't make the assumption that teachers know how to facilitate discussions effectively. I mean, you may end up with a IRE pattern where teachers think that that's a fine way to discuss. So, and they don't necessarily know the importance of facilitation. This really was driven home to me. I was saying earlier, so I was the course lead for 6 sections of this advanced instructional design course, and I went in and looked at the discussions that were going on, and really 2 to 3 of them didn't do anything, and then the other half, about half, they participated, but it wasn't really random, but it wasn't as strategic. So they would maybe say, I would ask them, so how are you determining when to participate? Oh, I make sure I respond to every single student every week. That's not bad. I mean, it's good. Or I make sure I post 3 times every week. So it was, the reason had more to do with maybe the social presence or the community of learners, as opposed, which again is important, but not focused on the content. So we went back and we kind of analyzed the posts that the instructors made. Most frequently, it just was logistics. Don't forget you have an assignment coming up, or remember to post this in this place, or so-and-so is going to lead the discussion next week. It was a lot of logistics. The least frequent postings were about the content. That's kind of scary, right? Because that's why they're participating in this discussion, so that they will learn content. I think it was primarily based on what the instructors felt comfortable doing, and these case studies might not have been something that they were as familiar with, and so they played it safe and they posted for these other reasons. But we did have a couple of experienced facilitators, and then we interviewed them afterward, and what we learned from them was how carefully they not only chose what to say, but how to say it. So they were very intentional in how they responded to students and how they moved them forward. And so we did a qualitative analysis of their posts to see, okay, what kinds of prompts are these instructors using? Is this something that maybe could help other instructors kind of get up to speed, if you will? Is there a way to take what these good instructors are doing and give it to others? So these were the prompts. Again, the qualitative analysis ended up with these 5 different kinds of prompts that the good instructors were using. Logistical, I already mentioned what that is. Process was to get the learners to kind of be aware of their approach to learning. So in a case discussion, you want them to provide evidence, or you want them to incorporate the readings. So a response from the instructor might say something like, oh, I really like the way you brought in the readings, or good job citing evidence from the case. Again, prompting them to do more of that as they talked about the other cases later in the course. Subject matter, that is what that case study is focused on. Application has the purpose of prompting the learners to think about how this might apply kind of in the real world, outside in practice, if you will. And then affective, it definitely is an important role in online discussions to help the learners connect to each other and to you, help them see that you're a real person, etc. And those are all important. Most of the prompts that these good instructors used a combination. You almost always have an affective aspect to a prompt, and then there'll be another piece of that's kind of moving them forward. So we took this, and this is with some different colleagues. We developed a tutorial that would support, and again, I'm very selfish. I'm thinking about this course for new instructors. How am I going to make sure that they become good facilitators? So we developed this tutorial so that they would become more intentional about their use of these prompts. We used articulate storyline. You'll see an example in a minute. So a typical tutorial structure. We gave a description or definition, examples, practice, feedback, etc. And then at the end, we asked them to review a post from the instructor and to kind of gauge, okay, what kind of prompt would that be? What's the intention behind that prompt? So I'm not going to click on this link, but this link will take you to the tutorial. It's fully accessible to anybody. And we made it very short because we know instructors don't have a lot of time, and they don't want a very lengthy process to go through. So this is at the point in the tutorial where we're asking the users to think about the intention behind an instructor's post. And again, we're not trying to say you're doing that wrong or that's not a good way to do it, but it's like, what's the intention behind what you're doing? And is that a good intention for kind of where you are in the discussion? Because you might guess early in the discussion you're going to have a lot more logistical kinds of things. And later on, or in the middle, you're going to be much more subject matter, application, etc. And then those process prompts, helping them think about how they're learning kind of happen throughout. So this slide is an example of how they get to practice determining what the intent is. So there's the student post. Again, this relates to a specific case study. Couldn't the retired workers be tapped for this information? It would be extremely useful to the trainer if the experienced workers were brought on board. 3 different possible responses. Absolutely, that's the focus of our next discussion. Why don't you post this there? So if you reveal this intent, it will say, yes, this is a logistical prompt. But again, you've got that affective in there too. Absolutely, good job, but post it here, okay? And the second one, of course, we all know how hard it is to get experts to articulate how they do something that they're expert at. It's referred to as the expert blind spot in the literature. Any ideas how to actually extract this knowledge from the experienced workers? So again, you've got content, because they're talking about this is in the literature, this is how we talk about this. And then application in terms of how would you get this information from a worker, okay? And then the last one, great idea. I like how you're thinking beyond the traditional definition of subject matter expert. Much more of a process one. I like how you're doing this. I like how you're thinking outside the box. Again, trying to encourage more of this in further, future discussions. Okay. Now we're really still in the process of evaluating the effectiveness of this, so I'm not, positive that it's going to have the kind of result that we would like, but we're gathering that information now. The general implication is just basically that different situations call for different kinds of prompts, and if you become aware of that, then you can use these prompts in a much more intentional, effective way, which should lead to better engagement of the students, greater connections to the course content, which is where I've been really concerned that they've not been going. It does have audio with it. That's okay.
Oh, go away.
You can hit the pause button in the audio. We can pull that up later if you want, but I am really just about done. So again, just kind of to bring it back around to this idea of partnering pedagogies and how do we really help teachers embrace and be prepared to teach in these kinds of ways. And I've only focused on a couple of these, but asking good questions, being able to facilitate intentionally are strategies that if teachers learn that, man, they are going to be well on their way to being effective teachers. It's really a slow process, so you have to help celebrate these small successes. And the teachers are going to gain confidence, and that increases capacity, of course, as they experience these small successes. And I still say professional development at this point, if we focus on strategies instead of beliefs, I think we're much more likely to reach teachers and not scare them off if we start talking about constructivist learning or other kinds of things that might just seem overwhelming to them. So we should have lots of time for questions.
I'd like to open it up. Thank you very much. We'll speak to your share a little bit later. I would like to open up to questions for. I'm sure you have got questions. So,
Yes.
I had a question about the data you showed in the responses.
Sure. The graph.
Yeah.
This.
That one.
Uh-huh.
So did you look at what sort of the maximum type of response could be for a question? What I'm meaning is it's sort of if you have a very sort of Boolean question, yes, no, where there's not really room
Right.
to get there.
Yeah, we made the decision when we were coding because students' answers were generally longer than, a simple answer. And I think I'm answering your question, but if not, then let me know. So some responses would hit multiple levels. There's comprehension level, and then there's some application, and then there's some critique or evaluation, whenever that happened, we always coded at the highest level possible because it's there, right? So, but we didn't then also code at the lower levels for that particular response. Okay, we always coded up. Okay, was that your question? No?
Partly.
Okay.
But also, if you have a question, but that would mean an analysis of the question, I'm aware of that you have a question that cannot be answered at an evaluation level.
Oh, probably. I would guess that's very true of some of the low-level questions. They couldn't have been. And yet, look, we've got some. I mean, it's not at the evaluation level, but we've got a little bit. Somehow students can, and again, I don't know what the facilitation was that was going on, but they did manage to include some kind of synthesis in their response. So, but yes, I'm sure there are some questions that there was no way the student was going to be able to respond at a higher level because it asked for a definition or asked for a label or something very simple. Yeah.
Other questions?
This is more of an observation, just looking at the data, that I was intrigued by how comprehension and the analysis sort of go hand in hand if you look at the graphs. And it might just have, I don't know if you looked at that, but to be able to analyze something, you are comprehending it at that level. And if the confidence is up,
Right.
then it would be interesting to see how you would analyze differently as opposed to you just comprehending at that level. So I just thought that was interesting that they go hand in hand all along.
Yeah, and I think I don't think you'd even have a high-level question without some comprehension, because again, when a student contextualizes their response, they'll probably include some of that information that says, well, this is the way I understand that, which is comprehension. And so you'd get some of that. But again, I think we didn't count that. We counted only then it at a higher level if it went beyond that. So some students started, well, this is how I understand it, and just stopped. And 33% in that particular, to the higher level questions. Yeah. Eric?
In your third example, when you looked at the facilitated versus non-facilitated discussion, was there any relation to student performance?
Okay, so you're talking about this, right? That's a good question. It's really hard to do those kind of analyses because almost every student in our course gets an A. So there's not much variability. I mean, you may get A minus or, but we thought about doing that. So each student turns in a case analysis prior to the discussion. And we thought about analyzing those to see at what level were those and how much content got covered in their own case analyses. I guess that'd be the closest we'd come to student performance versus group performance. But no, we didn't. Oh man, that'd be a lot of work. I mean, it's an interesting question. We definitely thought about it. It's really hard to get a learning measure for a case discussion or case course. It's very hard. And so that's why we like the idea of problem space, and I mentioned this morning, but it's not perfect because just because something gets covered doesn't mean students even read that post, right? If it's not covered a lot, chances are they didn't, that not everybody read it. So can you really say they learned it? That's a bit tenuous, I think. We need a better measure, and if you know of one, let me know. This is better than perceptions of learning. I really have a problem with, well, I think I learned a lot. That just doesn't tell us much, I really wanted to see, well, are they at least talking about what they should be talking about? So at least we got that, but yeah, it's an interesting dilemma.
Peggy, I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
And taking on board the importance of facilitated discussions and to really get students engaging. Do you have any tips or have you done any work with large cohorts where the facilitator can't actually be in different discussions at a time, or ways to help students be facilitators of those conversations?
Yeah, that's a great point to make. These are small courses. We have 15 to 20 students in a section. I have not looked at the large courses. In the study with the graph, some of these courses were undergrads. And one of them was a big intro to ed tech course where one of their units was kind of, okay, let's see what it's like to learn online. And they had a discussion. They had, some ethical questions I think they had to talk about, copyright or things like that. And they divided them into groups. And they had TAs facilitate those groups. So yeah, so I really haven't. It's a really important question, I think, because obviously the facilitator can only do so much with that many people. Yeah. And as I said this morning, there's no guarantee the students are going to read. Even if I'm doing a great job of facilitating all the groups and all this, I don't even know the students are going to read what I say. So it is kind of a dilemma. And I don't know how to, I'm trying, you ask students to tell you, well, did you read all the teachers' posts or all the peers' posts? And I'm not even sure how honest they'll be, because, right? It's like, oh, of course I did, yeah. But I did seem to get some honesty from them this last semester, and I was really shocked that it was a small sample again, 33 students responded, but out of all the sections, like 67%, only 67% read all of the instructors' posts. And only like 13% read all their peers' posts. So obviously just because it's covered doesn't mean they're necessarily learning it. So that's a real problem. And I understand they're pressed for time and they're going to be strategic about what they read. They've got certain requirements they have to get in and post. I really like what Sarah says all the time. I'm going to read hers. I'm going to respond to her. Yeah, that's what students do. They're smart that way, Those who really are interested in learning, they're probably that 13% that really want to see what everybody has to say. Yeah.
Question here, and then over here, and then Nikki's still taking the
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it was wonderful to hear you.
Thank you.
I was wondering with the advancement of cognitive computing, deep learning, and semantic response systems coming up, do you reckon that this automated response system will make a huge difference in the way the manual or personal response systems work?
So tell me more. I don't know much about automated responses.
Like we are on the cusp of introducing cognitive computing, smart deep learning, machine learning, machine response systems.
Okay.
Automated response systems.
Okay.
So
Okay.
how do you reckon that would make a difference with the response systems of like personalized and intervention-based response systems?
I'm really tapping into something I don't know too much about, but my guess is that those automated, even if it is smart, responses, is not going to be able to pick up on the nuances of meaning or of understanding or misperceptions like an instructor could or should. And so, and I don't know, it might feel very personal, because it could use their name and it could be, catch certain personality or characteristics of each learner. But in terms of the discussion of the content, I'm not sure. What do you think?
Yeah, like they're saying that by 2020 we're going to approach to quantum computing, which is totally, machine learning, semantic learning, and we see the Google prompts coming up, and other, and learning analytics coming up, and they're building up the response system, feedback, So I was just wondering, is there any preemptive research already to compare these two different?
Not that I know of. That'd be a great study to do, though. So yeah, I'm not aware of any.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, I don't know your name. So.
I'm Kara. I was just wondering, you mentioned adjuncts. Did you find that the adjuncts were the worst at the facilitating discussion?
True confessions? Not necessarily. We had a couple of full-time faculty members that, in fact, they're the two that I highlighted in my non-facilitated. I was really kind of shocked because I've been teaching with cases for a long time. I've been doing it face-to-face, and I just assume that people know how to facilitate a discussion, and it was a false assumption, And some people, one of our faculty members actually doesn't believe that he should be in those conversations, that that's for the students. It's all about the students kind of interacting with each other. I don't necessarily agree with that, but he does it purposefully. It's not like I don't have time for this. He just doesn't think that that's a good thing to do. I have had issues with a couple adjuncts. One who we actually had to dismiss because she wasn't really doing much. No feedback even on assignments or things like that. What are you doing? We've had others that have just been amazing, and I've been putting these scaffolds in place, if you will, over the years. So have a pre-course orientation, talk about discussion. I videotape myself talking about why the discussions are important. I have case notes for all the cases so that they don't say, well, I don't know anything about this. I've been putting all these things in place, and the most recent was this tutorial. And interesting, the group this time, 8 instructors, pre-intervention, pre-tutorial, we asked them to describe their facilitation style, and most of them were kind of where I'd expect them to be, in a good way. And then afterwards, asked for feedback, and most of them said, well, it really just reinforces what I already know or do. And for the most part, that was true this time. So we had very good adjuncts this time. It's luck of the draw, I guess. Yeah.
I have a question from someone who's attending from a distance.
Okay.
So Penelope's online, and she's saying, thank you for sharing this with us. And she's going to make a question that links on. I agree with you, the point about the fact that you cannot make an assumption that teachers can facilitate discussions properly. Have you had any chance to get data from the effect of the tutorial you created on the teacher skills? And
Yeah.
you've just sort of answered the question, but maybe you've got more planned.
Oh, we do. Again, it's kind of hard to measure the impact of that tutorial on facilitation. I mean, the best that we're doing right now is like, tell us how you tend to or how you plan to facilitate, and then did you change? And we did gather that data this last time. It was much more narrative-based, anecdotal, if you will. And we also asked, so the TAs, every section had a TA as well. They were volunteer graduate students that wanted the opportunity to TA in an online course. We asked them as well. We got more positive responses from them. It's not like, oh yeah, I already knew this. It's like, oh, I wish I had known this at the beginning, or I might have been more purposeful in the way I responded because I was afraid to disagree, but maybe I would have been more forceful if I'd kind of seen some of the examples. And then we opened it up to students. We hadn't intended that, but we do ask the students to facilitate a case discussion kind of the second half of the course in teams. And we thought, well, why not let them see this? So we opened it up to them and got some feedback from them as well, who said, oh my gosh, this case facilitation is so much different than case discussion when you're on the other side of the desk, if you will, and really found it helpful. But again, it's fairly anecdotal. I don't have rigorous data. We're in the process of creating a survey where we can ask instructors, they can more identify different kinds of prompts they tend to use, or give us more of that, and then more evaluation data at the end in terms of how would you improve this, or what worked, what didn't, what else would you like to see.
So in a way, you're researching this inside the case-based program.
Yes.
Do you think it might then be useful for the university as a whole?
Oh, that's a good question. That's big. Yeah, I know we're all moving to online education. I mean, I think like 70-some% of universities now say it's part of their strategic plan, and they have plans to move online, and yet there's only 20% of the chief academic officers who say their faculty are really on board. So obviously there's going to be the need for some kind of support. Making this available online, I mean, anybody could use it. I don't know if I'd use it in a training situation. I think it's too simple. It's just something you can easily do, but we could augment it certainly, or I don't know, it'd be interesting.
Any other questions? Susan, right, call this the last one.
When people prompt? A little bit. Right. I mean, there's certainly, like I said, logistical tend to be needed more at the beginning, or maybe the end of a week, or as an assignment becomes due. Not so much in the middle. So we've looked at it a little, but not systematically, again. It's just more intuitive, just kind of what I've seen. I just saw very little of the subject matter kinds of prompts where they're actually telling them, to think about the case more deeply or to push them in that direction. There's certainly a timing issue. But I would guess every discussion would be different, wouldn't it? In terms of, you might start with application and then move out or move in, you know, come at the big picture and then come in, or, yeah.
Thinking in terms of what you put together for the digital tutorial, you've got a situation and a choice of time.
Right.
Just another way to look at it might be if this situation arrived, would you or wouldn't you again?
Oh, sure. I really wanted to do more with this. You know, I was really getting into, let's let them, you know, really practice determining what kind of prompt should you use now. Maybe that's what you're getting at. But we didn't do it because we thought, this is getting too long. Teachers won't go through it all, they'll stop. And so we settled for kind of these examples instead. Yeah. That would be good. I mean, we could always make it optional, right? There's additional pages that people could go through. Yeah.
Right, so I think what we might do is wrap the formal part of the meeting up here and encourage you to stay around and talk with Peggy afterwards.
That'd be great.
Peggy, I'd like to say thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
You've taken time out of your own schedule to come and share with us, to share your expertise. It's been really interesting seeing the research behind things that we perhaps intuitively think about and have some understanding of, but to actually see some of the research that you've done to
Oh, thank you.
those things has been really interesting. And the tutorials and other things that you shared with us. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I would just like to say, ask everyone to...
Thank you. Thank you.